So we'll just a little bit of our agenda, what we'll be covering today. So I'll talk about the fear continuum, just how fear evolves. My slides are not advancing. There we go. Um, and then we'll talk like different degrees of fears and what it looks like. And we'll talk about how to promote the emotional relationship safety. But at the end, we'll kind of spend time on creating the emotional safety plan. So let's look at this fear continuum. When you hear fear, before I go advance my slide here, what comes to mind for you? What are some words, some feelings, some thoughts, some even images per se that you associate with the word fear? And just a question for you, is my speed okay? I know earlier this morning I was going way too fast. Doing better? Okay, I'm working on it, friend. Yeah. So what comes to mind for you? Is it okay? Sounds like we're all a little tired, so it's okay. I'll keep going. So often before we get to the fear, there's often a threat. There's something that, triggers that fear response in us. Because most of us don't just wake up afraid, for example. We wake up, there's something that's usually a threat, something that creates a sense of danger. And then something that leads to anxiety. Then we worry about it. Then fear sets in. And from that fear, it can go a little higher, a little deeper, depending how you want to phrase it. And it can turn to panic. And sometimes that panic, it goes even, you know, gets even more overwhelming, and that becomes terror. So we're going to look at each one of these terms here. So like I said, fear, the threat, it's kind of that sense, that feeling of danger, right? Often fear just pop up and happen in a vacuum, like I said earlier. So when a threat happens, our sense of safety not always altered per se, but we have a sense like we start a fear of losing that safety, right? And that's we'll talk about the fear in a little bit, but that's what the threat is. It's a sense of danger. Is that how everybody? And if you can stop me anytime where we disagree with me, please jump in and help us learn together. But that's how I see it. It's like usually there's a threat, that's a sense of danger, and then from that threat, we start kind of feeling anxious and anxiety. It's often sometimes we use anxiety and worry, interchangeably, but there's a little nuance there. With anxiety, it's more that sense of uncertainty. And I like how D. Baker puts it in his book, The Gift of Fear. He says that you don't have anxiety about the things you can predict. You have anxiety about the things you cannot predict with certainty. So when you think about it, fear, anxiety, sorry, is that feeling of uncertainty. And then what you do with it, depends. It can go one way or another, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that sense, just like, oh, this is uncertain. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I feel a little uneasy. That's what anxiety, that's what we refer to anxiety. And when I'm talking about anxiety here, I'm not talking about clinical diagnosis of anxiety disorder per se. This is just the everyday to day anxiety. Right? There's a lot of things for all of us to be uncertain about. Right? There's all the news about war here and there, earthquakes, the over places, violence, community, shootings in schools, like all of those things will make anyone anxious. I And you think about even just with COVID, we all had, different levels of anxiety with that, but it just brings that sense of uncertainty and it puts all of us on like a little unease. And that's a normal response to the threat that we have to our safety, right? So if threat happened, we still think anxious about it. And then sometimes the anxiety turns into worry, right? And that's when the first slide it says like worry, anxiety is where worry stems from, because anxiety itself is not bad. Feeling uncertain about something is not bad, right? It's kind of just the fact that I'm uncertain about this. But worry becomes this fear that we manufacture. It's like it's not real. It's more like, okay, what all the what ifs? When you start putting all the what ifs in your head, and still letting it like just weigh you down emotionally and become this dread, if you want, about the situation. That's what I think about worry as to be. And often worry is not always productive, right? So the anxiety itself, it's natural, that response there. But then when we get into the worry state, it's almost sometimes a sense of like self-harassment, like you're harassing your own mind, your own emotion about worrying about something often we cannot do much about, or there already a lot being done about it, but we got stuck in just in the fact that, the worst case scenario can happen.
We have a comment in the chat.
Yes.
Someone said driving, especially to cities and with lots of exits and traffic, used to be almost debilitating, but it has gotten better. Still, my stomach flips sometimes thinking about unfamiliar routes.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm glad that it got better. But I agree with you. Like, I can drive certain places, I know pretty well, somewhat, but I'll still get lost even with the GPS on telling me. But especially in cities, I love the work I do. I love that I get to go to Philly and meet some of the rest of the team and do things there. I did not like driving in Philly at all. At all. The one time I actually thought I'm going to catch the train, and then when I get there, I'll use the Uber because it was just that bad, But I needed to drive around a little more, so I managed to do it. My point is, yeah, sometimes it's just being uncertain. So with that anxious feeling, right? Like, okay, I'm a little uncertain about where I'm going to turn, where I'm going to park, right? And then I start worrying that, oh, this might just be really chaotic. And so you see, the uncertainty was natural because there's so many things that may be unknown. But then when I get stuck in the worry, that's when it becomes debilitating. Like, it doesn't help me take action. It just wears me down emotionally. And then there's the real fear. So now continue with your friend, you get anxious about it, either you start worrying about it, or you have real fear, which is actually a reaction that helps you lead into action. Right. For all of us this morning, when I was sharing about this, I actually mentioned, if I have children, like I said earlier, so if we're walking down the street, we're going for a walk and there's a car coming, the car, for example, presents a threat because, it could be something, anything can happen if my son is running towards that car or trying to cross at the same time. So the car becomes a threat, that's danger, danger, danger. And I feel uncertain. I'm not sure, if my son will make it to the other side of the road on time. So I feel anxious about it. But then I could either let that anxiety, if you want, works for me to the point where it creates a certain fear that allows me to either go grab my son and pull him out of the way, right? Or tell him to stop, or try to stand in front of the car. So I stop the car, before my son gets there. That's the real fear. So real fear can actually work for you. It can be to your advantage. And you think about it, life itself is full of moments of fear. And again, this become necessary as part of life. But we choose sometimes to either let that fear go into worry, or we let that pain, if one for that, goes into suffering. So pain in life is almost, we can't get around the person. Sometimes, someone is sick, someone is in the hospital, we have to move, we don't have staff. That can create a lot of stress. And so, it can be a painful saying goodbyes and trying to get to connect with new people. But choosing to dwell in it, and to the point where it becomes so overwhelming, it can get there. But then, we'll talk about that. It's okay to get help. But if we dwell there and get stuck there, and we can easily turn that pain into suffering when it doesn't need to, or we can turn that fear into worry, and they become destructive instead of being beneficial. So what I'm trying to say here is, let anxiety, if you want, work for you, that it leads to a healthy sense of fear that leads you to action, to do what you need to do in a time of crisis, instead of letting it go to the worry side, and then you stuck there and it becomes hard to even move, make a decision. Does that make sense to everyone? Is that clear? Does that help you kind of understand the difference between the three, like the anxiety, the worry, and the fear? Or if someone has a different suggestion too, please feel free to jump in and share. Okay. So fear is also, it's like we say, it can be energizing, where it leads to action and helps you. If when I have a test, sometimes I feel a little, oh my goodness, I'm a little anxious. I'm not sure what's going to happen on this test. The fear of not passing the test leads me to study, right? And if I start worrying about it, I'm like, oh, I'm not going to pass the test anyway. It's too hard. I'm not going to do it. Then I go the other side of things, and I don't do much about it. So we want the real fear, the healthy sense of fear, I call it. But that fear, it's not, it kind of manifests in different, in different itself in different ways. Sorry. And so sometimes like in that state of fear, you just feel, fearful because something that, there's a danger there, you're unsure about it and you have to figure out what to do about it. But fear is also that emotion where internally it affects us, right? And sometimes earlier someone was saying, well, sometimes when they feel fearful, they can be irritable, they can appear to be angry. And it's not anger, it's not irritability per se, it's actually fear that's hiding underneath that. So fear is an emotion. But for many of us, fear is also, a sensory signal. So I want to ask you this question. When you feel fear, if you ever had a time where you felt fearful, how did you feel that in your body? How did your body respond to it? What are some things, some sensory things that happened that made you aware that, oh, something is a little, off here? And you're welcome to chime in the chat or share out loud.
Someone said stomach ache, sometimes a sharp back pain.
Yes, yes. Yeah. I was sharing earlier, for me, it's like a stiff neck, and then my shoulder would just feel like I was carrying, like, I don't know, a backpack that was maybe, 1,000 pounds or something. Yeah, definitely. So sometimes with that fear, it leads us to action, or when we get to the point where it's fear upon fear upon fear. So it's like, this overwhelming, if you want, fear, and it's all in the moment, and we don't know what to do about it, to a point where it become paralyzing per se emotionally. That's what panic is. It's almost like realizing, oh, today is the 5th, whatever day is this, today's not the 5th, the 13th, and I needed to pay my rent on by the 5th, and literally I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm not gonna eviction notice, right? Like, you're panicking right there in the moment. It's this fear that kind of compounds, if you want, but it has a sense of urgency where, oh, if I don't do anything about it, disaster will happen, something huge will happen, or maybe I already missed doing something about it. Now I'm afraid of the negative consequences that come from it. So panic, sometimes I look at it as this fear that comes with a sense of urgency, and definitely with all fears like unsettledness, you're not sure what to do, and it's like, I can't do this. And I like how D. Baker, also in the same book that I share, he says how panic is the great enemy of survival. Because they think about fear as a friend that comes to let us know, hey, something is off, you have to do something about it. Panic then becomes and overwhelms us and we can't do anything about it. Fear helps us survive, when we see it as a friend, when we see it as a signal, as a messenger, if you want, that tells us that something is off, compared to panic that just comes and tells us this is the end, we can't do anything, and we pretty much will freeze because we can't do much about it. And so in the sense where fear was coming to help us survive, panic just debilitates us per se, and we get overwhelmed with fears upon fears, if you want, and it becomes hard to take action.
I don't know if this happens with other people, but I know
Yeah.
sometimes a behavior will bother me that one of my children is doing, because not only is it that behavior, but I'm thinking, what happens if I can't help them resolve that, and then it gets worse and worse and worse. Like if I can't get my teenage son to wake up for the day, I think, oh no, what if he's always like this and he never grows up and gets a job, and and then he won't be able to support a family, and all it is he's just tired that day. But I'm escalating it and getting really worried over things that haven't happened yet.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Karen. That's true. For many of us, it'll be one thing that one thing that starts as like a legit reason, right? But then remember we talked about worries, there's fabricated fears. So like we start fabricating other fears around it. And if there's a sense of urgency, well, like for you need to wake up a certain time, it's not done. So I worry, and then the worry turns easily into panic, because like, what if, and all of those have this urgency to it, right? Like you said, if and I joke with my kids, but we had this whole conversation not long ago. I don't know if it was maybe this weekend or maybe Friday, about kind of waking up and same thing, like learning those independent skills. And we were talking to my son about even just some hygiene stuff, and then he was like, well, I was not talking to anybody anymore anyway, nobody was there, who cared if I brushed my teeth or not, OT didn't come. So then I went down that path, and yes, I was not maybe fearful in that moment, but this is what that fear goes to goes to worry, and worry goes to panic, right? It's like you don't brush your teeth, nobody wants to talk to you because your mouth stinks, and then you're writing, and then people might not, make faces when they talk to you because they can't tell it to you, then it affects your relationship, your boss might not like it. And so I went on and on, and he looked at me, was so confused at the end, but I'm like, this is what feels look like. So in the sense I was trying to teach him, it was a teaching moment that didn't go too well because he was just overwhelmed with all the things I told him. I'm like, oh no, I created so panic when I was just trying to teach him. But that's what panic does, right? It's like, then I can't get a job because nobody wants to be around me. I will never have friends, I won't never get married. I won't have any lovers because nobody wants to kiss me because I'm upsticks. Like, it was this whole long list of stuff. And mind you, he's 11. So he's looking at me, 11, and the way his brain thinks, he's like, this is too much. Like, it's not concrete. He's a concrete thinker. There's so much, too many hypotheses in my scenarios that I lost them, right? In trying to explain it. But that's what panic does. So, well, right on, Karen, right on. But then sometimes that panic goes a little farther where it becomes into terror. And most of us have heard, with 9/11, all, things around the world, we've heard the term terrorist, but it comes from that. It kind of creates this overwhelming fear and panic all at once. And then there's so very little that we can do about it. Like, we can't control what's out there, right? And so, like, in this constant state of fear and panic all the time. And many of us here, in this country nowadays, we don't maybe live like this per se, with the terror, that's the sense of terror all the time. But we've heard stories of people who live in unsafe neighborhoods where, going to bed at night can create that terror. Just like, I'm not sure who's going to come trying to rob my house when I'm trying to sleep. So if you have this constant fear all the time of something that, the uncertainty is real, and you can't control it, it can create a sense of terror. And what was maybe a little anxiety become this full-blown anxiety, and constantly. So you can easily go, like we talked about too, from that, anxiety, that fret comes, and then you feel anxious and you start worrying about it, and you have real fear to take action, or that worry builds up into panic. The panic gets even deeper. I like this little grid here from I'm not going to say it right again. Atrapamente. I don't know how you say it. Somebody knows how to pronounce that, let me know. That's ATRAPAMENTE. But they kind of had this little grid here about worry, stress, anxiety, and fear. What each one of them does, what it is, what the function is, and when it can be a problem. So if you, again, I'm not going to read it because you probably already got a copy of the PowerPoint by email this morning. But the point I'm going to make here is that each one of those things are just our body's response to our environment, our body's response to the stimuli, if you want, that that's coming at us. And if we let it be our friend, it informs us so that we can do something about it. But if we don't see it as a friend, then it can become a problem. And we'll kind of go through different levels of stress here. You're going to see how easily the little tiny stress can turn into full-blown, problems that become harder to deal with over time. But even then, I want to say, even then, help is still available. Don't want anyone to leave here feeling like, they're doomed. I worry too much, or there's so much going on with, things in the world that creates uncertainty. I want you to know that no matter where you are on this, all the stuff we talk about here, that there's always help. And you can even reach out to us. We'll connect you to more support. Or now, as we have the 911 for all the emergency in this country, now all the emergencies, in this country, now we have 988 for mental and emotional wellness concerns. So it has this help out there and connects you to professionals who can help you. So some of you mentioned, I think someone was mentioning the back pain, I believe, sharp pain in the back when they feel fear. So fear will manifest itself in many ways, right? It's like the fret comes, it's like, oh, my body needs to respond to it. I have to do something about it. For some of us, it's the headache. Some of us, our muscles become tense, and sometimes it's, your heart starts palpitating, going faster. You're beating faster than your heart beats faster than before. But it's because your body's trying to do what it needs to do to take care of you. So again, see it as that fret becomes your messenger. I need to do something. Either I'm going to fight this, I'm going to run away from it, but your body's getting ready to do something. Sometimes it's sweating, right? People just start sweating, profusely when we all get nervous at tense, for example. Again, read it as messengers. Think about it as a messengers telling you, do something. And then when you experience fear or fright that leads to fear, and although on that continuum that we talked about, your brain will respond differently. Sometimes people freeze, where it's just like it's too overwhelming, and you just shut down, you feel numb, you feel empty inside. And again, none of those responses that we're talking about here are bad per se in themselves. This is just to bring awareness that we all respond to fright differently. And so if, there's an emergency, there's a flood, there's, the car accident, or you're trying to rush out the house because, the house on fire, like I don't wish telling anybody, but we talk about emergency preparedness, this quarter here. So when those things happen that are outside of our control, natural disaster and so forth, and everybody's rushing out, you see someone just kind of freeze per se, emotionally or physically even. It's not that they don't care. It's their brain is just overwhelmed with what's happening. And sometimes your brain is like, oh, we're going to take care of this. It's like, I'm going to fight. I'm going to get ready to fight this and address this and resolve this however way I can. Right. And that's when you feel like this rush of adrenaline just to be like, fight the big bear per se and take care of matters in your own hands. And that's fine too and dandy. Right. But sometimes we're like, I can't deal with this. I'm not going to shut down, but I'm going to just disengage. Like, this is too much. I'll still function. Sometimes people start distracting themselves with other things, but they're literally trying to remove themselves from whatever the stressor was, whatever the threat was, right? Another response is to fawn. And that, when you think about it, especially people who've been through a lot of abuse, for example, who experience abuse, very easily they feel out of control, that like they feel like they cannot control their own lives. Others have control over them. And as a sense, it's almost like it's hard to even set boundaries. It's hard to speak up for themselves. It's like, why try to speak up for myself now? Because everybody else will be, will kind of have power, more power over me, right? And then it's kind of that loss of self, right? I don't know who I am because I'm trying to do everything just to please everybody else because everybody else has power over me. Others who might be looking from the outside were like, well, why can't they speak up? Why can't they say no? Why can't they do that? Well, sometimes because the brain is just so overwhelmed with the stress, the freight, whatever it's in front, they're just like, I'm just, there's no need to fight here. I can't overcome this. And you kind of just, become, if you want, you lose yourself in the process of trying to address a threat. Sometimes we submit, and losing yourself, sometimes for others, it looks into just like kind of caving in and giving up, and doing whatever people ask for you. So it's, if I crossing the street and I'm probably one of those people, someone comes and trying to grab my purse, I'll let them have it because I'm like, I'm not going to fight you. I want to save my life first, right? Let them have it. So I just kind of submit to the threat and let that happen. Again, there's no wrong or right way. Just in that moment, your brain is just thinking about what they need to do, what it needs to do to protect you. And all these things might look different, but it's all ways that the brain is trying to protect you. And sometimes people do what we call capitulate. If I said have the accent of proper syllable there, and that's from Dr. Bruce Perry's work. And it's when, without even knowing it, it's almost like an automatic way of just coming up with creative ways to avoid the pain or the shame. So it could be when, people who've been through some kind of, challenging situation, something really harmful happened to them, and you ask them about the story, and it seems like the story is changing over time. Like, well, they told me this, and now they're telling me that. It's not always intentional that they're trying to lie to you per se. Sometimes it's just in the moment, the brain is trying to make sense of what happened, and what happened doesn't make sense. So the brain is trying literally to find meaning, to the situation, and in finding meaning, the stories get convoluted, if you want, right? And they might not even be, intentionally doing it. They might not even be aware of it themselves, because again, your brain is just overwhelmed trying to protect you. Because this cannot be happening. It doesn't make sense. So it must be this. And so they tell you the story of what must be, but what must be was not actually what happened. And then sometimes in that state, people also will deny their own feelings. It's like, no, I wasn't there. I didn't feel it. Like, why, if I felt it, why didn't I react to it? Why didn't I do anything to protect myself? Right. So in all of this, again, are not bad. It's just how we're responding to it. So I'll pause here. I'll pause here right now. Are these new to some of them? And sometimes people know the flight of free response, but not always all the other ones. Are any of these new to you? And if you have any questions, feel free to share as well, so we can address those.
Someone said the last three are new to them.
Yeah. Okay. Does it make sense though after we talked about it? Like, can you see that happening? Maybe, you know, for some of us, like I shared in the morning, I experienced all of these, depending what situation it was and how prepared I felt, you know, in that situation, or supported or protected I felt. Yeah, and sometimes you can go from one to another. It's like at one point you're shutting down. The next moment you're like, no, I need to take care of this. And you try taking care of it and just like, it's not working. I'm just going to submit and give up. And then you're like, okay, maybe I should just try again. But now I'm just, no, I'll still be here, but I'm just going to try to please everybody and not be assertive in the process of it.
We
Right?
have
So
lots of yeses. And then someone also said that they've seen those things before, but didn't realize they were fear responses.
Yeah. And that's the point. Thank you for putting it the way you did. That's the point. It's for all of us to realize, you know, just to bring awareness. This is something how we respond to fear. When we're certain about the future, and certain about a situation, our brains will do different things. And sometimes all the above, right? And it does not make us weak. It just makes us human. Any questions before we pass to the next section? Any questions about any of the things I shared so far, the fear continuum or the how the body and the brain respond to fear? Okay. Good. So let's talk about promoting emotional and relational safety. So in this section too, I'll have a little bit of mini agenda if you want. So we'll look at different types of safety. We'll look how we can go from stress to trauma, how stress becomes trauma or can become trauma. And then how we can also, when we're in the anxious mode, how we can get ourselves to emotional safety. So when you hear the word safety, what comes to mind for you? Like, how will you define safety even? And when you say I'm safe, what do you mean? I told you I'm going to put you guys to work. I want to make this interactive. So help me teach the class. I know there's plenty of good ideas here. Feel free to use the chat. And I know, like I said, I know it's evening and some of us are like, oh, it's the end of the day. I need my bed, and I get it. And maybe, just maybe, we're doing very well on time. Maybe we're going to be done sooner than I expected.
Someone said protected. Someone said, like in a game of baseball or a tag, you make it to the base.
I love that. I love that analogy. Is it okay if I use that later on, or, you know, for my life now? Like, I like that. Safety is kind of making it to base. Yes. That's a really good one. Really good.
Someone else said that everything is good.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, friends. Thanks for sharing there. So when we think of safety, often many of us just think about the physical safety, you know, where there's no violence, you know, nobody's physically harming us. There's no physical injury per se. Our environment is safe, you know, and that is good, but that's not all to it, right? I can be a place where, you know, nobody's physically harming me. I can get around my house safely without not tripping on anything. I was sharing with friends earlier that I have a physical limitation, so even my kids leaving the toy on the floor becomes, you know, a problem for me. That, you know, the barrier to my safety. So I can be in an environment where there's nothing on the floor for me to trip over, and I'm not afraid of any violence there, but I can still feel emotionally unsafe. And we'll dig into that here. So the emotional safety then is how, when you feel safe, back, the idea of coming back to base internally, when my mind, my emotions feel secure, I feel calm and at peace. And also there's another step to that. Emotional safety is also when I can share those emotions with people without fear of being judged. That I can say, I'm afraid, I'm worried, this scares me, and be okay with, sharing that information and knowing that the person who's hearing it will be supportive and non-judgmental. So that's emotional safety. But for many of us, in order to be safe, I can be in a safe environment, I can be emotionally safe internally. We all need relationships. We all need, people to support us in different levels of support, whether it's paid staff or family members or friends or neighbors, community helpers. When we do our summits here in March and April, you'll get to meet, hopefully you're coming out for that and getting these emails, going to be all across PA. You get to meet with local local emergency responders. Those are people in the communities that help us be safe, firefighters and EMTs and all of them. But in order to be safe, yes, we need people to help us be safe in the community, but we also need people closer to us that we do day-to-day life with, in order for us to feel safe. I have to, and when relational safety is when I can be myself with you without any fear again of judgment, that I can connect with you in an authentic way. I don't have to put up a front, like we say, or pretend to be someone else. And when I have that relational safety, I feel like we're sharing power per se, that you don't have control over me and I don't have control over you per se. It's not power over, it's power with. That's relational safety. And that can look different for many people, even in parenting, even in caregiving. You can still have power with someone and empower them to be their true selves. So, and when you think, and earlier someone mentioned about financial safety too, and I believe that any type, these are just a few types, but any type of safety that you deal with or you mention, emotional safety is always at the core of it. Because I can take care of the crisis right now. Let's say the crisis is, there's a flood, we need to leave. So physically, we're not safe in that moment. We remove ourselves, but emotionally, you must still be dealing with the thought, the feelings associated with that incident. Same thing with finances, right? I might have a financial crisis right now and it's taken care of, but even as it's taken care of, now I'm worrying about when the next time it's going to happen again. So even with natural disasters, in the moment we can get to safety, but how many of us then worry about, if somebody ever robbed me, I'll be worrying often a long time about, how safe I'll be in that environment. And even over places, we become hyper vigilant because our brains are trying to protect us. Does this make sense to everyone? Is this concept new? Like, if it's new, is this helpful to kind of realize that emotional safety is at the core of every type of safety out there? And this is the time I say, I am sure and approve this message. I'm sticking to it, right? Because I feel like everything we do, honestly, comes back to that. But often that's the part of our lives, the part of ourselves that we invest the less time and energy and resources to take care of it. We think about, putting locks on our doors. We think about getting, car insurance and all the extra insurances for home insurance, all the things that we need to protect ourselves, right? But then how many of us actually think about the emotional toll of just doing life, the emotional toll of going through a crisis? We often don't think about that. So this is why we have this training today, to help all of us become more aware of it, and then see also, like someone said, those fear responses, how our bodies or minds are responding to the threat that we're facing.
Someone said in the chat, I remember different times when I felt like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. What was going to happen next, specifically related to financial difficulties? Yeah, right on. And that can go along the same, something that when it happens to with health issues, right? With a loved one who are maybe in and out the hospital. You're like, okay, right now we're good. Knock on wood. We're not going to end up in the ER again. I remember those days.
where every time you're like, even when everything is well, it's just like emotion, you're still worrying about the next thing, next shoe dropping, like you said, when's the next shoe gonna drop? So even when the physical crisis is gone, the natural crisis is gone, often the emotional stress lingers. So let's look a little bit about how stress can become trauma. But before we do that, I want to remind you, Robin says it best. Not every drama is a trauma. So something can happen in life and it's very dramatic and it affects us, but it doesn't have to become trauma. It doesn't. And there's no one size fit all. What works for one doesn't work for everyone. You can go for the exact same quote unquote drama, and one person will experience as a trauma, and the other person will just experience just as a drama. They just get over a little better, and vice versa. It doesn't make anyone weaker or stronger than the other person. It just makes us human. And the way we respond to the stress we're dealing, to the threat that we're dealing with, depends on many factors, many. Our past history, if we ever experienced something like that before, how much support we have, how much information we have about the situation, when we even understand what's happening or not. House, we used to joke, my younger child it's doing better now with that, but when he was younger, he had adrenal insufficiency, and just his body just doesn't make cortisol. So we used to joke like that's why he's always happy-go-lucky, because he doesn't feel any stress. It doesn't matter what's going on. And there's sort of some truth to that. And so it could be the exact same thing. So, but he's dealing with differently. And then the smallest thing that none of us will even pick up on, he's having a full-blown, meltdown about it. Same situation, same family, same situation, same DNA, but dealing with it differently. So we're all different. So this is again to bring awareness and to help all of us take care of ourselves and take care of others in a more compassionate way. So let's look at those degrees of stress, right? Sometimes stress is positive. So remember, like I was saying, about that fear that takes me into action, to grab my kids off the road if there's a car coming, to remove my hand off the stove, when I'm cooking. That's the kind of positive stress that tells me, oh, there's something here you need to do in order to be safe. Then I act on that. That fear leads me to take action that protects me, that guarantees my safety. So sometimes it can happen, it's brief, it's something small, something that, if I take care of it right now, it's gone, it's dealt with. Sometimes people call this acute stress, which is it's happening right here in the moment. I deal with it, voila, it's all gone. But sometimes we go through stress that is serious, but it also is temporary. It's like, okay, I know someone mentioned the financial stress. Like I know right now I'm in financial crisis and it's serious and it's hard. But once I get over this hump, I have helps coming. Someone is helping me figure this out. I'm going to apply for different supports or services and things that are going to make it a little easier. I have someone to help me as a family member or friend. That stress becomes tolerable. It's still serious, but it becomes tolerable because now I know there's an end in my insight, right? But when that stress is not tolerable per se, or it was, and then it lingered, and the hope of the fact that it was going to be temporary is no longer temporary, that's when we get to that toxic stress. So this is when the stress is intense, it's prolonged, it's just like, it's there over and over and over again. For many of us, it's whether, not feeling like we have control over our own lives, over people making decisions for us, over people taking advantage of us, people not respecting us. Could be things that others might even pick up on, but that can create this toxic stress. For many of us caregivers, it's the back and forth to doctors and therapies and calling for services and trying to be mom and the chauffeur and the cook and the nurse and the case manager all at once. And when it's all the time, it's intense, it's prolonged. And often if you don't have the support around you to kind of buffer against the stress, it becomes toxic. Toxic. Any questions about this? Can anyone relate that sometimes you had stresses that were positive, someone that was tolerable, and sometimes it was just like, oh, this is a little too much? Yeah, I see those thumbs up. Thank you. So just like we talk about the fear continuum, there is a stress continuum. And I want you to think about it again, back those different levels of stress, right? So for many of us, before we even feel stress, we're kind of in this ready zone, this green zone here, Well, all is well. This is how I function at my best. Life is good. Someone will say, all is good, right? I feel safe right now. Emotionally, my relationship, my environment, all is well. I can function in my best, my best state. I feel motivated to, to do whatever task I have at hand. I feel calm and steady. That's where we all want to be, right? But we also know life happens. And sometimes when life happens, we go from that green and ready state to this yellow and reacting state, where it might be a little bit of a nuances, like something that like, this is like, this is kind of getting to me. This person didn't show up for two shifts in a row. We're waiting for this DSP. We're waiting for this, this person that's supposed to provide support and they didn't show up. This is the second time they're late. Okay, this is still getting irritating. But I can manage this. It's a little stress, but it's not to the point where, I'm feeling like it's out of control just yet. It's frustrating, but I can manage this. And sometimes we feel a little bit anxious, a little bit like, I don't know if they're going to come or they're not going to show up. In our house, when we had change of staff, I remember my son used to actually go and shut the door because he didn't want this person to come in. So in the outside, it looked like, he was being rude and disrespectful. But actually, this is how he was reacting to that change. He was irritated that his best buddy, who he thought was his best buddy, was no longer there. Now the stranger just walked here, supposed to be with me all day long. No, he was not okay with it. And he did what he could in his power to let us know. Right? But for some of us, when we start kind of in that irritating, that reacting state, that's where maybe that tense down, the tense muscles, start happening, or a little bit of a headache. It is mild things that are not too bad. It's like if I, deal with this right now, it can go. And this might be maybe, so some of us, that reacting state is when we deal with some of the positive change, even positive stress even. It's a little bit stressful, but if I can deal with it right now, we'll be fine. Right? If I can snatch my kid away from the road, if I can shut that door, if I can call the doctor, then, I will be okay afterward. But right now in the moment, I might feel a little bit irritated. And then when that little stress, maybe that felt little, that started as supportive or positive at the beginning, doesn't get dealt with, doesn't get taken care of. And I feel like I'm going towards that tolerable state now. Okay, this is here. This seems a little serious now. I'm starting to have like, little bit of wear and tear emotionally. Like I've been lingering in this condition, in this situation for a little too long. And for some of us, this is when then we start panicking. Is this ever going to end? And then like, I don't see a way out. Then I start feeling depressed about it. And sometimes people might start using substances to kind of numb the pain of the situation they're in. But for many of us, it's just because we're responding to the threat that was in front of us. Right. And then we could have, that's the time where the headaches are getting more intense, right? And for some of us, the muscle tension and pain start getting more. So you start having these different health issues. And a lot of times even like, GI problems, where because there's so much of our mental and emotional health that starts from our GI tract. And that's where our guts are actually now called a second brain. And you can Google all this stuff, we find out, but there's a vagus nerve that starts from our guts, if you want, that spreads all across the body. That helps us, feel calm, that helps us regulate ourselves. That's why sometimes when you're stressed, for many of us, sometimes we're running to the bathroom, or we can't eat, or we're vomiting. And you're like, what does that have to do with anything? Because that's literally, where it all starts. A lot of our hormones can help us, be well, starts from a GI tract. So that's why a lot of us get GI problems under stress. So when you're in the injured state, then literally the physical health start, compounding, if you want. Emotionally, we start going downhill. Sometimes we feel guilt or shame or blame about what happened, even maybe it's not our fault. But when that stress becomes toxic, when that stress been there for too long, it becomes overwhelming. And I'm get to a point where I can't do anything about it. Some of us, that little bit of anxiety turn to a full-blown anxiety disorder. Little moments of sadness, now it'd be full-blown clinical depression. Because we've been that state for so long, and our brain trying to help us and protect us for so long, and emotions are just worn out because of what we've been through. And that's that red state here, that red column, when now we're feeling ill. So the stress not turn into illness, and this is where the stress becomes trauma. And I'm not saying that everybody who has a diagnosis of depression, anxiety, is necessarily have been traumatized. But many of us have dealt with life situations that easily went from little stress to traumatic stress. And then at that point, we start having different symptoms. So when we're surrounded with a lot of uncertainty and it's continual, we don't know when or what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and we'll continue that fear mode. It's so easy to go from, I'm just a little anxious, so now I really cannot function without, anxiety medicine. And there's no shame in that. If you need it, we need it. I can stand here and tell people that it works when we need it. I've been there, I needed it, and I'm glad I did, so I can be here and live the life that I have today. It's okay to get help. But when you look at it from this standpoint and you realize it's not somebody being weak, it's some of us have been through a lot of stress that literally impacts us, all of us, physically impacts our entire body, mind, and spirit and soul. Another way to look at this is for this, it's kind of the same grid. And this one was created for firefighters. And so it's the same thing, but I like what they have, kind of the words they have in quotation there. So when you're in your green state, you're in your calm, you're actually thriving. And your mindset is like, no, I got this. I got this, I can move forward. And then when you're in that yellow state, when you're like, oh, I'm reacting to the stress that's happening, it's starting to be, it's maybe still positive stress, but it's there, it's acute, it's right now and here, I need to do something about it. That point, like, okay, I'm surviving, something isn't right, but it's not that bad yet. And when we get to the injured state, that orange column, remember, now it's like, I'm struggling, I cannot keep this up. This is becoming really hard. I'm going to push through all of this. And then when we get to that red state, that's the time, in the previous slide, it was when we feel ill. If you think about the levels of stress, this is that toxic stress now. Now I'm in crisis. I can't survive this. And that's where many of us, people, then the stress becomes trauma. But then sometimes that's where people get diagnosed with things like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. But just because you've been through trauma doesn't mean that everybody has PTSD. No, there's different criteria that you have to meet to have that diagnosis. You can experience a trauma and bounce back from it well. You can even have PTSD, and bounce from it. So there's hope out there. There's hope. Any questions about the stress continuum and even this other, alteration of it? Yeah. Is this helpful? And you have the PDF, so I'll let you take the time to read for each one of them. And even using it, like when someone is reacting to someone is acting a certain way, think about behavior. Often we say behavior is communication, right? We spend so much energy and strength and resources to modify the behavior, but we don't really try to start thinking often. We don't spend much time in wondering, okay, is this person in a calm state? Most likely not. Maybe what we're calling the behavior, no, actually, I think it's behavior. Me speaking here, this is a behavior, right? So it's not, but all behavior is not bad. But when we're starting to think about, oh, why this person having X, Y, and Z behavior, maybe this is another way to look at it. Is which zone are they in, if you want, right? Are they reacting? Do they feel injured? Or are they at the point where now it's starting to turn into illness? Are they surviving, struggling, or are they in crisis? And then we really have to do something. Any comments? Any aha moments? All right. So we talked about kind of the illness column, if you want, and that crisis column. So when we look at the continual stress, that's where we start thinking about trauma, where the stress becomes trauma. But often people focus on even just one part of trauma. Trauma is kind of a two-part thing. Trauma can be actually an event or a series of events in itself, that cause some of that psychological injury that we talked about, that affect you to the point where it becomes, debilitating per se. But it can also be your response, your emotional response to that distressing experience. So it's kind of a two-prong. One, the experience that happened is traumatic. Sometimes people think about like, car accidents, abuse, any type of abuse. the sudden death of a loved one. You know, the incident itself is trauma. You can call it trauma, but also my response to a distressing event is trauma to me, if that makes sense. So that's why it can be the exact same event. I can call it trauma and you can just call it drama. You can be, no, it's not traumatic, is I'm not there yet. And that's okay. Maybe for you, you're still kind of that just reacting state. And but for me, I'm already in the crisis state. Does that make sense, friends? We do all agree on that definition per se, or does anyone has anything they want to add to it?
I have several yeses in the chat.
Okay, thank you. So I don't know what happened. My chat does not change. So I'm glad that you're there, Victoria, to help with the chat. So
I'm happy to help.
It's just technology works when it works. All righty. So when we've been through trauma, when we've been through a traumatic experience, and sometimes when when the crisis modes and it becomes traumatic, we tend to have different attempt to affect us in different ways. So all the things talk about how the brain responds to threat, that happens, how the body responds to threat, that happens. But there's common things that also happen with people experience trauma. Is one of them, it's kind of have these unpredictable emotions, right? It's like, because when trauma happened, it tells us that the world is not safe. When there's crises, when there's danger, our brain internalizes the world as an unsafe place. So if things are unsafe, the world is unsafe, I don't know if I should laugh or smile or actually be afraid. Or maybe every time I try to have a good moment, I'm like, oh, no, I better be on the watch out. I better be vigilant because something can happen. I'm waiting for that shoe to drop. Right? So emotion become unpredictable. But also people experience trauma, sometimes there's flashbacks where you can be living your life, doing something totally different, has nothing to do with what you experienced. And then that flashback happened, like you relive the memory in your mind. And sometimes the flashback happens in your sleep, then we call them nightmares, right? When you're actually dreaming about the things that happened in the past that were, that did not go well and that impacted you in such a overwhelming way. And because, trauma tells us that the world is unsafe, it can cause strained relationships. Because if everything is unsafe there, I don't feel safe, my environment, I don't feel safe emotionally, I don't feel safe relationally as well, right? So that it makes it really hard to connect with others. And we talked about those physical symptoms already, right? The headaches, the nausea. And it's like sometimes people might not even pick on the emotional stuff first. It's the physical things that leads people to the doctor. I have these headaches that don't go away. I have this nausea and bellyache. It doesn't matter what I eat or don't eat, that don't go away. And now hopefully more doctors are becoming trauma informed so that they can start digging deeper and helping all of us get the help that we need.
We have a question in the chat, Shu.
Yes.
Someone asked, do we always need to honor everyone's response to a situation, even if we think it is unfounded? Like when my daughter was born with Down syndrome, an extended family member called the event a crisis in her own life, and that bothered me, but I didn't tell her.
Yeah, and I think that was very healthy. Yeah, because for them, it was a crisis in their life, but, and it's okay for you to acknowledge back to emotional safety, right? I acknowledge my own emotions that I don't like this, but I don't feel relationally safe enough to tell this person about it. All right, so that's you honoring their feelings, respecting it, but also protecting your own so that you maintain your emotional safety. Does that make sense? Yeah, because people react in different ways. When I had my stroke, my dad came and say, you cannot afford to be disabled. And I turned around, I couldn't speak, I couldn't walk. I turned around and wrote this article that actually went viral on Twitter. I think from friends from the orthopedic, shared it first. I put in my blog, I can't afford to be disabled. And I even shared about my own story, how before when I struggled with mental health challenge, it didn't bother anybody because nobody could see it. But now that I was in a wheelchair, I couldn't talk. People felt embarrassed to be around, including my own father. And that was hard pill to swallow, right? So although like talking to him will not change anything, but I took it as my own advocacy, if you want, to bring awareness that no, we all need different levels of care. Yes, we all have weaknesses and strengths. And no matter whether we fit, in anybody's bucket of disabled or not disabled, every human being cannot function alone without others. And we all have value no matter what, right? So sometimes that's what happened. Like I
to protect my own emotional safety and not even bother having an argument with him because he couldn't see that. But I knew that I needed to do something for me in order to release that anger and that frustration that I felt, even the hurt from that statement. Right. And so in my article, I didn't say it was him. That's just the first time I think that publicly, I'd say that's where it came from. But I needed to share that message that people don't choose to be disabled. And even those who are, for those of us who help take care of loved ones who have no quote unquote disabilities, we love them. We see the human in them, and they are people of value and contribute, in so many ways. And it's sad that others can't see that. Right?
Someone
kudos
said,
to you.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Someone
ahead.
said, sometimes I feel that people think we are superheroes.
Yeah, as a caregiver, right? It's like you know you can do it all. And even when you're so tired, you're not just even allowed the dignity of of rest, right? Yeah, yeah. I hear you. And that's the time where I'm human. And sometimes it's just telling yourself, reminding yourself that you're human. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, friends. So then when we have those threats and when we don't feel safe, what do we do about it, right? We in the anxious mode, and all of us, we're talking about all of this because we all want to be safe. We all need to be safe. That's a human need for all of us. But Bruce Perry, remember I talked about him earlier when we looked at how the brain relates to threat, reacts to threat. And so he talks about regulation, and he says that it's the ability to put time and thought between feeling and action. So many of us, when the threat comes, we start feeling that feeling of fear, right? Fear comes, and often we either take action, we don't do anything at all because we're so overwhelmed by it. But if we can take the time to regulate ourselves, which we'll talk about, shortly here, it actually gives us not just a time to pause, to process, to be calm enough so then we can take a healthy action. Or maybe if it's something that we shouldn't take action to, but at least then we are in a clear mind, if you want, to be able to make that decision, whether or not to act. So to go from anxious to safe, I love Dr. Bruce Perry's, 3 R's. That's actually, I think that's a good way for all of us to bring yourself to that calm state, and so to building that safety internally first and then externally as well. So that first R is to regulate. And to regulate, it's regulate your emotions. That's what we're talking about here. And that can look different for all of us. And the good way to do it is finding the soothing activities that just help calm your nervous system so that you are not constantly on that flight or fight mode, and you're actually, being able to calm down, to slow down. And some of the things that help, some activities that help control movement, so some people it's just walking back and forth. For some people, it's actually pacing. For some people, it's actually yoga. So whatever it is that helps you kind of bring that sense of calm. But even focused breathing, deep breathing helps. Sensory tools is a very good as also, because when the threat comes, the brain feels like danger, danger, danger. It's so hard for us to even think about the here and now and what needs to be done, because we're thinking about all the possibilities of all the what ifs. But when you engage your senses, back to the sensory tools, whether it's a fidget toys, whether it's a chewy tool, whatever it is that yourself or loved one needs, that actually helps ground you, if you want. It brings you back to reality, because your senses, bring you back to the here and now. Whether it's something you smell even. Right. So a good way to regulate that I use for myself and use it for my loved one as well. I just were like, what do you see? It might be very random, like when somebody's having a full-blown panic attack or having a meltdown, you ask them, what do they see? Or sometimes I even start shaking, oh, I see a balloon. And they'll catch them off guard. I'm like, what balloon? Right. But that's a way to help them regulate, just to slow down and focus their brain on something. What do you smell? What do you taste? What do you feel, and what can you touch? Right. And then after we actually help someone regulate the emotion, we can also relate to them. With relating, it's either an activity or an action that helps them build that connection. Because when I'm afraid,
it's one thing to be afraid, and it's in the worst thing to be afraid and alone in the fear, where I feel like nobody's there to help me. That not only that can easily go for your fear goes totally from from fear to anxiety, from anxiety to terror, right? Because like now it's like, oh, I'm really stuck in this. But when there's others who can relate, we can connect to, that create that sense of belonging, it brings safety. And to relate could be something as simple, like I mentioned earlier, like I can start regulate myself, and thinking about what the things that I see, or doing something that's calming and soothing, and in a way that helps someone else, kind of model it for them. But I can also relate to someone else in the sense I can come and say, hey, I'm afraid too. I'm also scared. I'm not sure what will happen next, but I think no, we'll figure it out together. That is reassurance, right? And that's also know where you can relate to the person. Making yourself available, giving choices. That's a huge one, because when Fred comes, it tells us the world is unsafe. Then we feel like we're stuck in that uncertainty. We feel like we have no choice. So when you start helping give someone choices, now when you help them relate, but then you also help them regulate at the same time. And choices can be as simple as, we have to leave this house by 3 o'clock. Do you want to leave at 2:30, or do you want to leave at 2:55? By 3 o'clock, we're going to be out the door. Something that simple, right? Well, we have to take this medicine with some kind of food, for example. And I want you to eat fruit. Do you want an apple or banana? So we can still give choices within limits and still kind of help the person, again, connect with us in a healthy way. And in doing so, help them regulate their own emotions. The third R is reason. So often we jump quickly to reason when someone is having a hard time, dealing with the situation at hand. We're trying to give them 10 million reasons why, they should have not done that. That was not good. That was not safe. And at that moment, they can't focus. Just like when you're overwhelmed, when, there's a threat and you're feeling fearful and feeling anxious, it's hard for you to reason with your own emotions at that time. But why do we do that to others? Now, so reasoning should be a last resort, like a last step if you want. And we only get to the reasoning after we know that the person has regulated emotions, and they feel connected and safe. So they have both that emotional and relational safety. Then we start kind of the teaching part. And with reasoning is when we start finding, okay, what did we learn from this? What could have been better? What we could have done differently? But don't try to teach someone a new skill while they're overwhelmed. The brain is gonna have a hard time processing that and remember what you're teaching them. And sometimes I know that, if it's an emergency and you have to quickly bring your loved one to physical safety, I understand that's sometimes needed. But once you get to that physical safety, before you start going for 20 million reasons on why you needed to do that, help them regulate first. Any questions about this? Anything in the chat? Anything that resonated with you?
Nothing in the chat yet.
Okay. All right. Does this make sense? This helpful? It's something you can use.
I'm getting several yeses.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. So I had these pauses already here for questions, but I just asked this question. There was none, so we'll keep going. Feel free to, time in the chat or mute yourself if you have a question. So now let's look at creating your emotional safety plan. So now we talked about how your emotional safety is not only the one type of safety that goes with all the other safeties that we need if you want. So it becomes even more important for us to do that, right? So what is a safety plan? Oh, there we go. So it's a list of ways that, you can be mentally and emotionally safe. That things that you can do or things that you sometimes choose not to do in order to become safe. And why do we need it? Well, we can't control everything, right? We can't control what the weather and what it's going to do. We can't control, we're going to have a power outage, but we can work on ourselves. And when we do have an emotional safety plan, it helps us, to respond to, things in a more proactive way, and even to react to it also in a proactive way, right? Because,
you're going to respond to address it, but the way you react to it, even internally, all those things we mentioned about, how the brain deals with threat, that it helps you also kind of process that in a healthy way so that you can adjust to crises as they come. Okay. And I want you to remember, and if you remember anything else, that I've been saying this already, kind of the emotional toll. When you go through something that's stressful, the event will pass. The financial, the physical, all the losses maybe can often be remedied, but the emotional toll lingers longer than any of it and impacts us more than any of it. So that's why, if nothing else, that's why literally where we have to keep taking care of emotions. So there are two parts to the emotional safety plan, and this is Dr. Sandra Bloom, who wrote Creating Sanctuary. This is kind of where this information comes from. So she talks about internal safety and then external. So it's all emotional, but things that are internal are things that I can do inside of myself to keep myself safe. Things that are external or things that I need from my environment, from others, in order to feel safe. So now I'm going to ask you, what do you need to feel emotionally safe? And this is in general. And if a specific incident comes to mind, that's fine. But I'm trying to ask you just in general in your life, what do you need to feel emotionally safe? Anyone?
Someone said others around me being understanding.
Yes, that's a good one. And that was one that was actually falling in my head too. Just like knowing that people around me who get me, And so I want to ask you, is that a internal or external item or thing that to your emotional safety? And something it could be both. But remember, internal is something that I do for myself. External is something that I need from my environment or from others. And anyone can chime in for that. Would that example be internal or external?
I have several external responses.
Yes. Yeah. And then if we took it a step further, for me, yes, it's good to have people around me that, who understand, but I have to internally decide to build those relationships too, right? Internally decide to connect with those people. Yeah. So what you said is true. It's definitely external, but the decision first to even engage in those relationships is internal as well. Good.
We did have another comment that said, when I want to be alone, it's no problem. But if I were being ignored, that's different. It affects us internally.
Yes. Right on. I love that example. Yeah, we all have the need sometimes to just, have some alone space, alone time. But yeah, if somebody pushes me into that space, whether intentionally or not, then it becomes hurtful. Thanks for sharing. So let's look at some examples of kind of the internal safety. So sometimes just acknowledging that I have power to find ways to remain safe is a thing. Like back to those decisions I'm mentioning, right? Kind of, I decide to connect with others. I've decided to do something about it. That's internal. That's something I choosing to do. Another thing is kind of picturing just a safe place. I love being at the beach, and sometimes when I'm overwhelmed, and it's not always because physically my environment is safe, but sometimes just stress in general, I will try to picture myself at the beach, or sometimes I'm watching YouTube videos, in the of the beach, or I have an app of nature sounds. I can hear the waves crashing, and that just calms me down. So wherever your happy place is, it's picturing that and bringing that to your remembrance is a way to create internal safety as well, especially in the midst of a stressor. But I want to encourage you to think about what you say to yourself too when you're in those crises. Or do you have any thoughts that are just maybe overreactive, or things that maybe are not true that you're telling yourself? Like, I'll never get out of this. I don't know how to do anything. Those are internal forces per se, but they're not healthy ones. So think about what you're telling yourself, and switching that is also a good way to practice internal safety.
breathing. We all mentioned about how when we feel overwhelmed, when we're stressed, when we're anxious, when we're fearful, how our heart rate will start, racing, our heart start racing with palpitations and so forth. So practicing deep breathing is a really healthy way to self-regulate. Also back to those ideas of what we tell ourselves. If you create a personal mantra or affirmation, sometimes people call it, it helps you create that safety. If I could tell myself, you know what, I'm safe. I can overcome this. Others are coming to help me. Even I was not even fearful per se, but even just saying that out loud, I don't know about you, but I feel some calmness that comes with it. It carries weight because those words are powerful. Words are powerful. And then for some of us, for people of faith, it's praying for people can own ourselves in that moment can also be, a way to ensure internal safety. Right? Listening to calm music could be another way just to kind of bring that internal safety. Yeah. Anything else before that you might think of that we could add to this list of internal safety? Because these are just suggestions. It's definitely not, the only options. It's just some suggestions to get you started. Anything else you might add to your internal safety list?
Someone in the chat said reading scripture for people of faith.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's a good one. Thanks for sharing. Let's look at some external ones now. Sometimes you're just scanning the room to see, for things that help me be safe. If I'm feeling a place where I'm like, oh, there's flood or earthquake, something that's natural disaster, but I can notice where the exits are, like where I can actually leave the house. Like, okay, those are the windows, there's the doors. That can make me feel safe, but that's something that's external, right? The decision to look for them is internal, but the fact that this is outside of me, it makes it external. But also when I'm physically in the room, find a place where you feel the safest. For some of us, it's right by the door per se, but if there was, if there were tornadoes, for example, sometimes, we're advised to be like, in the basement, right, in closets. So that could be that's something that you do for external safety. So yes, you do, it's going to ensure your physical safety, but also for your mind and your emotions, knowing that you are in a safe place, create that internal safety we're talking about. And looking around to notice that other people feel safe. So if I'm panicking, but then I look around back to that relating and that regulating, right? If I look around and I'm trying to relate to someone, maybe not even intentionally, but I see that, my loved one, my staff, my, coworkers are calm and they're safe, I can feed off the energy because all of us, we pass our energy as we go and we can impact other people's energy as well. So if people around me are safe, most likely, there's a higher chance that I'll also start feeling a little safe. Like, oh, okay, I think it might not be a bad deal here. It's not so big of a deal. Maybe others are look like they're doing okay. And drinking cold water might sound funny, but there's actually research behind this. So if you're anxious, when when you are feeling fearful, after we talked about the heart racing, right? So many of us, your heart rate will go up, your blood pressure will go up for sure. But when you drink something cold, it actually slows down your heart because it lowers the internal temperature of your body. And so everything kind of forced to slow down. And if you don't have, cold beverage to drink, sometimes just holding something cold, whether it's an ice cube or something, it helps. I even had people who just think about something cold as a way to kind of change their mindset in that moment. If you can and you're able to, and it's safe to do so, sometimes closing your eyes is not a bad idea. So think about it. If you're gonna, personally gonna be able to pick up your loved one and take him out, out of the room per se, to safety, it could be okay and sometimes even good, for them, if you can say like, just close your eyes, I got you. Like you create that relational safety, and you physically removing them is helping them, regulate per se. And then them closing their eyes is that they're kind of tuning out what's around them, right? So then, we're looking at the debris of the house that's crumbling, for example. I don't wish any of this on any of us, but I know that some of us experience those things, and these things could happen. And that's why, again, we're having these trainings and talking about emergency preparedness and bringing this idea of uncertainty and trauma into the discussion. Obviously, if you're able to, you leave the room, right? That creates your physical safety. But the way it relates to emotional safety is that if I'm out of the room, I can stand outside and see, oh, I'm not there, right? I'm not there where the danger is. That internally, they're still feeling safe.
We have a really great comment from someone who said that they wish that they could close their eyes when teaching teens how to drive, but that isn't safe externally.
I'm with you, my friend. I'm with you. I'm not sure who said that, but I'm with you. My daughter finally she passed her driver's license just this past Thursday. And I had to have a friend help teach her. Like I was just getting in the car with her after she already got she did all the preliminary learning and she could actually drive now. And that's even the first few times I got in the car with her, it was scary. I wish I could close my eyes. I wish I had those pedals on my side too, so I could be braking when she was driving. But then eventually, I'm like, eventually I had to send her back to my friend to help her teach her some more. And yeah, I can relate. I can so relate. Yeah. So back to that distracting. So yes, sometimes people talked about people being busy and kind of busy bodies when there's a crisis as a way to, pull away from it, kind of flee the situation. But if it's done in a healthy way, it's not bad. If I'm in a place where I'm calm and I'm doodling, coloring, drumming with your finger back to the rhythm. I think I talked about it earlier. It creates a sense of normalcy, a sense of calm. I do something to help my brain remember that life is going on. There's beauty around me. Whether it's rocking, whether it's sucking a piece of candy, for example, that brings a lot of things back to the sensory thing of regulating, right? It could be something that's enjoyable, like, I like the taste of it. Like it is something that reminds me that there's still good around me. So little things like that, when sometimes we take for granted, but has a huge impact in our, mental health and how we, we regulate during crises. So then I ask you, anything you want to add to this list? Anything else that comes to mind that is an external, something we can do for external safety? Obviously, the last one I had on this is tell someone you trust that you feel unsafe.
Someone said aromatherapy, like scented candles.
Yes. Yeah. Even just essential oils. I carry some around, and just sometimes like, lavender and peppermint, like something, sniffing them, like, and it helps me calm down as well. Yeah. Anything else that comes to mind? Right. So here's an example of an emotional safety plan. And there's no right or wrong way to do it. This is just a way for you to kind of have this somewhere that it becomes easy to put in practice when you need it the most. So what I have, like the first column, I'll be like, when I'm triggered, and then a list of things that I do when I might feel fearful. So you could either do that, because when you say when I'm triggered, then it could be anything. It could be fear. It could be, stress. It could be anything that just, triggers my emotion in a way that pulls me from that calm and green state that we talked about, right? So for me, I can say something to isolate, like not just be left alone and not be around people. And then the second column there is like what I can do internally, back to those internal, internal safety we talked about. And the last column is things I can do externally to feel safe. So again, there's no right or wrong way to do it. These are just some suggestions, right? For me, if I start pacing or breathing too fast or feeling nervous, I'm like, okay, something is, I might be in that reacting state, right? Where it's not bad yet, but definitely there's some stressor there. So then something I can do internally, it's the meditation, whether, and that could be actually both. If you're kind of going to use the app, it could be external because, you're accessing it. But if I start meditating internally with it, that's in my internal way to self-regulate as well and find calm. And I did, put a few suggestions there. There's calm, there's headspace, there's Insight Timer that I buy. There's lots and lots of meditation apps these days. And some of them have, paid. All of these are put there are paid and free version. And I have the free versions, and I still feel like I have what I need. So it depends how much you want. Like with Headspace, there's 5-minute free meditation, guided meditations. Insight Timer has like a journal in it, and it has this emotional check-in where you can check on your mood every day or track your mood, as you go through a crisis, for example. But it also has the meditation, the journal, and the check-in all in one package. So I like that. I like it for that. I buy it as a faith-based one for those of us who want something like that. And then sometimes for me, like talk back to the idea of drinking something cold. Ginger ale is my favorite drink. So then when, I feel like, okay, my heart is going a little too fast, I'll just, get a glass of ginger ale, a glass of cold water even. It's going to help me calm down. So this is an example of what you can put in an emotional safety plan that, as always, personalize and make it more personal. So to the person, to whoever you're doing it with or for. And I'll say if you're supporting someone, do it for yourself as well, as a way to, again, to relate. So it's not just, us doing this because they need it, but no, we're doing this together because each one of us need this. Is there something you see yourself using? Could this be helpful for you or for your loved one, for those you support?
We have some yeses, and then we have someone who said it would be great to add to their loved one's ISP.
You got it. Did you read my next slide already? That's exactly what we're going to talk about. It's like once you have a plan like this, creating plan is good. But if you create it and you put it underneath the, in your drawer, and it sits where nobody sees it or knows about it, it doesn't help anyone, right? So that's when it's good to put it to good use. And these are some suggestions that I said, add it to other plans you already have, your IEP, your ISP, whatever it is that you're really making a plan, include some of those in there. And it doesn't have to be a separate plan or even a separate page. Just if you have those things, think about it as part of the ISP that I talked about, part of the IEP, just kind of pull those things into your plan as the support that you need, the things that, will be helpful for you to feel safe emotionally, during stressors. And when you do that, share that copy with those who support you. Because sometimes in the moment of crisis, when I'm overwhelmed, I might have the words, although right now I'm speaking and doing this verbally, I might not always have the word to explain what I'm going through because I'm so overwhelmed. But if it's already there and I already share with people when things are calm, others can go and even just point to it and remind me of what I need. Now, I remember when we were teaching my son deep breathing, we used a card with a candle on it. So it's pretty much like you inhale your breath and then you blow the candle, it's like catch your breath so you can blow the candle. That's how we taught him to do it. And pretty much as an inhale and exhale. And so when he was overwhelmed, we'll show him the candle picture. And just as a reminder, we didn't have to see any words. And that helped him, to regulate. So, if you have loved ones who need those, you can be very creative with this. Very creative. You can do it as a picture, you can do audio, you can do a video. So whichever works for you and your loved one person supporting, put it in the format that works best. But review it when you're triggered and pick something you can do to feel safe. So it's good to do this when all is well, but then remember to use it. Because if you create it and then you never look at it later, it doesn't serve anyone, right? All right. This is actually the end. So I'm going to ask you this. How will you use your plan? When will you create one or incorporate something that you're doing already, and how will you use it? This is your ticket, your exit plan. And then I'll definitely be here for questions, but how would you use something like this? Then I'll put our contact info here so that if you have any questions or need any extra support, feel free to call or email there.
Someone said definitely adding it to the ISP. Someone else said for my own self-care, which is something I need to get better at.
Yeah. And I agree. Yeah. Thank you, friends. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight. Yeah, we're done early, so hopefully you enjoy your evening. Like I said, I'll linger here if you have any questions. Thank you again.